Hello, and welcome to today's FutureTech conference. Today's session is where we're exploring kids' technology and how we protect children from this relatively new era of online social connections and user-generated and unsuitable content, etc., being at their fingertips. I'm Simon Fell. I'm the chairman of the Digital Television Group, and I'll be your chair today. The session is about who's responsible. Do we blame the technology providers? Do we blame the content producers or parents? Who's responsible for looking after this, making sure that things are stable and secure for children and they feel safe when they're viewing content and using content online? Is technology the bad guy and who's the hero? We'll be discussing all of that and what we have to do to safeguard children. It's funny, in preparation for this, I was reminded of a session that I did about 15 years ago, would you believe, at the Sheffield's Children TV Festival when I was at ITV. And I came across it because at the time I asked my daughter, who was in year 5 at the time, which is about 9 or 10 years old here, to interview her class about their use of technology. And here are some examples that I had. This is circa 2005-06. So MSN Messenger, a couple of them were using that, if you can remember that far back. Nintendo, 6 of them had one of those. They had iPods, the PlayStation 2, 4 of them had that. Again, these are 9 and 10-year-olds, whether they had them at home or they're their own personal ones, I can't quite remember. But PlayStation Portable, whatever happened to that? 2 of them had mobile phones at that age, which I think would be completely different today. And 2 had Apple laptops. That shows you the area they live in. And they liked TV shows such as Friends, interesting, Little Britain, The Simpsons, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Drake and Josh, Disney's That's So Raven, and they also enjoyed playing a game called Nintendogs, which was a pet simulator. Whatever happened to that? So we fast forward to 2020, 15 years later, and we have the most viewed video on YouTube today is Baby Shark, which is a little animation put together by someone in South Korea. It's had 7.3 billion views. I'll say that again, 7.3 billion views today. And the South Korean music company that built off the back of that success has amassed $88 million in sales. This is a very significant market. Streaming relationships right with regard to children's audiences is ever more important. So today we're going to hear first from Carl Hibbert of Futuresource, who will give us some of their research that they've done. And then we'll step over to hear from our other speakers. But before we get into the session and get started, let's get everyone to just say hello and introduce themselves. So first off, Carl Hibbert of Futuresource. He's head of consumer media and technology there.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Simon, and thanks for everyone for joining us today as well. My name's Carl Hibbert, so I head up Futuresource's Consumer Media and Technology Research Division. We're an independent market research company based in the UK and conducts relevant primary, secondary, industry and consumer research across the overall synergetic industry for media, entertainment and hardware. Thanks, Simon.
Good, thank you, Carl. That's good. And now I'm switch over to Chris Wood, CTO of Spicy Mango Technology.
Hey, Simon. Thanks for having me. Chris Wood. So we're an OTT enterprise technology group that provides architecture and design services and software solutions for service providers in the media industry.
Thank you very much. And now all the way from Geneva, Madiana Asseraf-Jacob, who is the head of business development and also young audiences with the EBU.
Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody. Hi from Geneva, indeed. So I'm with the European Broadcasting Union. We are the largest union of public broadcasters with 115 members in 56 countries. And altogether, we operate 2,000 television, radio, and online channels with our members.
Thank you, Madiana. And finally, Martyn Farrows, COO of SoapBox Labs.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martyn Farrows. I'm the COO of SoapBox Labs. We are voice tech for kids. So we build accurate, age-appropriate, and safe voice technology experiences for kids across multiple markets. And so I'm coming at this a perspective of building an AI and a data-driven business that also respects the fundamental digital privacy rights of children.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, less from me and over to Carl to hear about their research that they've done recently. Carl, over to you.
Great, thanks. Lovely. Thanks once again, Simon. So first of all, today, I think with the structure of this session, I'd like to maybe just take 10 minutes as an introduction session, just to really give you some headlines from a survey in the last 7 years amongst kids ages 3 through 16. And then in the second half, a bit later on, I'll walk through the new media and also new technology trends we're seeing amongst this age group. Well, so just a little about the survey itself and how we can. So we run this survey twice per year amongst 3 to 16-year-olds, and as you can imagine, the trends and themes amongst that age range is significant, and therefore we split each of the age groupings by 2-year increments. So we're able to really drill down into what 3 to 4 years olds are doing, 7 to 8 year olds, and so on and so forth. We look at this trending across 7 countries, key markets in Europe, EU3, but also as well emerging markets in Latin America, the US, and also importantly as well China. It's an online survey of 1,400 in each of those countries, segmented equally amongst gender and age ranges. And as I mentioned, we're running this twice per year, and we're just about writing the questionnaire for our 13th wave, which will be due to go live in the field in the next couple of weeks. So as you can imagine, our last wave, which was conducted 6 months ago, focused very heavily on the impact of COVID, the impact of home learning and education, and also as well the impact on the digital behaviours of kids during this lockdown and during this pandemic in terms of consumption trends across media, and also the impact on traditional activities behaviour. So just taking some of this research now, and the research, just to caveat, I suppose, all the charts that I'll be using today are taken from our last wave, which was conducted in June 2020 across the various markets. I also think it's quite a good stake in the ground to use this slide up front, really just to show that kids' viewing behaviour is changing, no doubt. Kids' awareness of content sources, the ease that they can now navigate and discover new content across multiple platforms is becoming at an ever younger age. But I think what we are seeing, and I think some of the UK data here is probably kicked quicker into the online and SVOD service numbers quicker than it has done in previous waves. And we dug down into that, and the reason being that more kids and more people in the home during this pandemic have been fighting for that main TV. So in the previous wave conducted in December 19, certainly in the UK, the live channel component within the UK was more significantly higher, on par with the US. It was a bit of an anomaly in the last wave of research. So I think we can hear all these tales about the rise of YouTube, the rise of Netflix, but I think it's critical really to underpin one of the key headlines on this slide, really, that live channels, linear, scheduled programming certainly isn't going away overnight. There's still a huge demand in markets like China, the US, other markets we're covering like France, but also as well in as I mentioned in the UK. Still, an awful lot of money is being invested by broadcasters, content owners, and pushing best-in-class content through that traditional media. But with all of these things across all of these different media, it's now vying for attention, vying for eyeballs, and vying for kids' time with other platforms, which certainly are investing significant amounts of money, which gives the content industry headaches in terms of where to put their investment, where to put those dollars, where to put that content. Also as well, it means that there is now a more fragmented industry, fragmented sectors in which to enable really, I suppose, a strong protection of kids across all of these platforms and all of this content. And I think bringing it back into devices and habits and trends, I know that a lot of people talk now about kids considering the second screen to still be the second screen now being the TV screen. But what we do find is that as more and more services have broken into the TV set, as smart TVs have become smarter, the user interface has become slicker, kids have migrated back to that TV screen, because at the end of the day, why not? Why would you want to watch it on a much larger screen set? But that said, the viewing, and going back to Simon's point before in terms of device ownership back in 2006, a couple of people owning smartphones, a couple of people owning Apple computers. The same really can't be said nowadays as well, where you've got 3 to 4 year olds having hand-me-down and often sometimes new smartphones for usage, arguably never making a call on those phones as well. But these devices, as everyone's fully aware, have full access to multiple video sources and multiple content types, in which once again, we need to consider how best to manage and protect children as they become exposed to more and more content, more and more platforms as well. So really more fragmented nature from not just a content perspective, but also where those eyeballs are leading to. Obviously the experience which is delivered on each of those platforms varies significantly again. And just drilling down, once we've gone past the platforms themselves and the devices, to actually the services as well. We've got the likes of the traditional broadcasters in the UK now, joined by real big heavyweights within this industry who are gaining traction, gaining footprint extremely quickly. When you look at Disney Plus there in the UK, only launched in the UK in February time this year, just around about the lockdown time. Already capturing significant attention, significant eyeballs. Once again, joined with it by other leading platforms, which throughout this lockdown period have just gone from strength to strength. Anyone can see through Netflix and quarterly numbers, their performance is continuing to rocket. And as they repurpose, as they redeliver and actually drill down and offer more improved platforms and propositions for kids, then so too will their interest continue to rise as well. So these platforms like YouTube, I think one of the topics we certainly will be covering today is the importance of YouTube, but also within YouTube, the user-generated side of content, but not just the consumption of that content, but also the curation of that content, which is now being driven by many kids themselves as well. Creates a whole new set of headaches when we actually look to consider protection of those as well. So we really are looking once again at a very much a fragmented market with some huge big hitters, certainly investing heavily in terms of their content and reach, not just within the content, but also devices themselves. One of the other angles we've looked at when we've through our Kids Tech consumer research program as well is the overall multitasking of kids and how their attention spans and focus is much more diluted than it has been in previous generations gone by. On the left-hand side there, on the broken pie, we looked at the percentage of kids which are actually doing something else while watching TV. Even kids as young as around about 50% of kids ages 3 through 6 are actually multitasking, doing some other activity while watching TV. When we look there across on the right-hand side, what those activities are, over 50% of those kids are gaming while watching TV. 46% are in some form of communication with friends over WhatsApp or other social media platforms. One of the most bizarre things for me is 19% are actually watching another video while watching TV, which throws up huge headaches then for advertisers in terms of where actually is their attention, where actually is their focus. And then probably more worrying for parents and teachers is that 30% are actually conducting homework while watching TV as well. So this whole dilution of focus, attention, really, as I mentioned in the headline there, presents real challenges there in terms of monitoring what that child's doing, from an education perspective, but also from an industry perspective as well, is what really are they focused on when they're conducting multiple activities. And for advertisers, where on earth do you put your advertising dollars? If multiple platforms are being consumed at the same time. So I appreciate that was quite a whirlwind tour. So there's, it's over 100 questions. So what I really wanted to do there was just really skim the surface of some of the key headlines coming out of Kids Tech with regards to the consumption of media being fragmented across a number of platforms. But even within this fragmentation, still a mainstay of kids still consuming traditional channels of linear, but counteracted to that is a rising consumption of key video services like YouTube, like Netflix, and also like Disney Plus. I think importantly as well, just to highlight as well, is that the TV by no means is dead. The TV as a device still presents this most significant opportunity for big entertainment and big consumption. So I suppose that'll be the wrap up from my first port. So at this stage, I'd like to hand back to Simon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carl. Very interesting research that you found there, and we'll just grill some of the others for a little while, and we can see what people think of that. I mean, one aspect is that in the world of broadcast TV, which I'm really glad to hear is not dead as we may have thought. That's good news. I never did think that, but there you are. Some people do. But we've always had this issue where there's been a watershed. So children's programming has gone on till, say, 9 o'clock, and then more risque material may come on after that. We've never been able to match that in IP-delivered services. So maybe I'll ask some of the other panelists what their thoughts are on that issue. We don't know what time it is on the internet exactly, Chris, but how are people finding ways to sort of replicate this kind of protected environment in the online world? So over to Chris first.
Thank you. It's tough, right? I don't agree that we actually have safety in broadcast. I think, to your point, the UK watershed isn't an ultimate protection, right? And that approach is not global. OTT has a way to make the implementations far more robust and flexible than we have in broadcast because of the bidirectional nature of IP. If we take device, location, profile information, coupled with strong metadata, that's all really key to this. But it's a huge hill to climb. There are 44 global content rating systems. Canada alone has 2 inside and outside of Quebec. So the technology challenge is tough enough for things like studio-delivered content that generally has a really good set of rich metadata. If we take user-generated content, the platform owner can do nothing really without correct metadata and identification of the content. And this really needs the individuals producing the content to contribute through descriptive metadata. So, for me, OTT stands a better fighting chance, but I still don't think we've got it right in broadcast.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, I think when children are young, they often want to wait after 9 o'clock to see what it is that they can't be so allowed to see. And now we always have warnings when something happens immediately after the watershed, say, about to contain this. But, you can't exactly replicate that in the online world. You see a lot of people trying to introduce family logins now. Netflix do it, Disney Plus does it. That's something that we're seeing more of. And there's lots of well-meaning schemes around the world. There's the COPPA in America, there's GDPR-K in Europe. Madiana, maybe from your perspective, what steps do you think content owners and broadcasters are taking now to identify strengthening these issues for online viewing?
As you say, Simon, it's not just Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon. Our public broadcasters' owned platforms also have more and more their own sort of windows for children of or under 13 in most cases. There are several initiatives that we're also involved within the EBU and with our members, together with the European Commission, with the International Telecommunications Union and so on, to somehow create awareness which is, I think, the key of one of the solutions we can have. Create awareness with the platforms, with parents, with schools, with kids themselves about the importance of using internet in a safe way. From a technical perspective, as I said, we have more and more broadcasters that have their own environment for kids, and also when they distribute their content on third platforms, use the specific windows for kids. But as you said, we cannot control that online either. Many kids prefer to consume the content that is not necessarily for kids. A teenager might not want to go to YouTube Kids, for example. He or she might prefer to go to the normal YouTube, the adult YouTube.
Sorry, not following my own advice and unmuting, but yes, indeed. Thanks, Madiana. Very interesting points. And Martyn, in the work you do, you're very concerned about privacy and the way this is managed, if you like. And what changes have you seen in the last year or two in this area? Do you think it's something where more attention needs to be paid?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a kind of recognition, particularly on the part of content providers and creators, that they have an obligation to make choices which reflect their brand values. So I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what Chris said in terms of the scope and potential, particularly for kind of OTT delivery, to collect many different data points and to actually understand a lot more about audience when you're distributing content to them and controlling how that is made available. But that requires investment. It requires investment on the side of the content creators in terms of things like metadata, but it also involves choices around, what kind of data and profiling do they want to do themselves in order to be able to understand their audience, and how do they make sure that they are being consistent with, as you pointed out, the regulatory frameworks like COPPA and GDPR, whilst they're doing that. So it's not straightforward, but there is the opportunity and potential to be much more proactive, I think, in this environment.
Well, you mentioned something there, profiling. I would have thought that's something, we want to be very, very careful of in terms of children. As I understand it, the regulation prevents targeted advertising, which is obviously where a lot of money has been made in the online world. Maybe back to Carl then. I see he's got his headphones on now. Carl, what's your thought in terms of the way content is being protected and the regulation that we're seeing coming in? Have you had much feedback on that in your work?
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear at the moment, Simon.
Okay. The point was in regards to regulation, and as we were just hearing, the fact that targeted advertising and things of that nature are kind of ruled out for children's markets. Are you seeing major changes in platforms and things around Europe as a result of this impetus?
I suppose that the real challenge with regulation and I know with kids is is the fluctuation between markets, isn't it? I know there's some of the Nordic markets which completely limit or negate any focus from that perspective. And I think as we now start to move to targeted advertising and programmatic advertising, then I think there's bigger and greater concerns there as well, isn't there? That you can now actually start to really target and focus your efforts and profiling of kids. And I think it's always quite a worrying thing when you can actually start to what we consider target when people are vulnerable and kids being in that category. So I think there is certainly more that needs to be done in terms of the governance there.
Okay. Maybe back to Madiana then. We talked about safeguarding globally in terms of how different countries deal with this. Just thinking about the regulation now, are you seeing great differences between countries in regulation in the work you do with your members?
There are some differences, but there is more and more tendency within the European Union to somehow align in the regulations that we have. As I mentioned briefly earlier, for example, the European Commission is working very actively on different policies to somehow strengthen digital skills for kids, but then also prevent them from navigating in an unsafe environment. There are texts regarding obviously privacy. There are texts regarding the prevention of cyberbullying and so on. Both from preventing from the negative behaviors and also fostering and promoting the positive behaviors and everything good that technology also has for kids. So there is more and more tendency to align, while obviously, of course, you also have some slight differences within the markets and how the platforms and the broadcasters approach to this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this year, of all years, we've found that the educational benefits of online content have been great. And whether we're adults or children, I think we've all engaged with much more content online than we ever have before. It's interesting, in the UK, there's been some recent work on online harms legislation, which will establish a new duty of care to companies to have robust systems in place to make sure users are kept safe and deliver a high level of protection for children rather than the typical adult user, for example. And on top of that as well, I think there are further plans to do well. They've just introduced regulation around video service providers who provide sort of shared content environments. I think you were talking about this, Chris, earlier in terms of user-generated content, protecting children from that. So that's been introduced. I'm not sure how it's being regulated or controlled at this stage. Chris, have you any more thoughts on these new legislations coming into place, how this will find its way into the technology sector? Is a PIN number enough nowadays, or do we need more?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think controls that we have today are really basic, right? You mentioned the PIN protections available on some services, but it's not enforced from a service provider perspective. I think in a lot of cases, children know the PIN codes from parents' phones, right? You see them in the streets playing or in the homes playing with phones. I'd sort of question how secure this is and whether, a lot of these youngsters know the pins and it's the same pin set across the set-top box. Regards industry tooling, there isn't really a proprietary solution or standard. Implementations are really left to the service provider to figure out. And I think, as others have touched on, it's a technology and a standards problem. We need the metadata there. We need support. It's a shared responsibility model from my perspective. If we've got, a mass of people producing user-generated content, we need them to be able to describe the content that they're producing, set the metadata, define whether or not it's rated for adults, or effectively all that we're doing with these controls is just making the barrier to access more difficult, right? I think if we can't categorize the content into, safe and maybe unsafe for minors, we're not tailoring the experiences. We're just making it harder and harder for people to sign up. And I think, to sort of Madiana's point, I think around sort of the standards and the policies and the note around GDPR-K, et cetera, the very things that I think a lot of the policymakers have put in place to try to, protect youngsters, and I use that in air quotes, are the very things that are now making it very difficult for us to, manage the safeguards in the platform in the same way that GDPR introduced, a notion that an IP address was personal information. Well, things like that, they're really not. It's very difficult to associate an IP address to a household day to day. So I don't know. I think this is really tough to solve.
I think the whole idea of, as you said, the children sort of using other people's logins and things of that nature is interesting. There was a program I caught a glimpse of last night. I didn't watch it, but it was about a certain large retailer called Amazon, I think, in terms of how people buy more smartly from there. And I just caught one piece when I was in the kitchen, and it was the lady was saying that her kids load up her wish list effectively on Amazon, or her basket and she has to decide whether to go ahead and buy those goods or not. And she was talking about one occasion when her kids loaded it up to £1,000 worth of goods sitting in the Amazon basket, which, with an inadvertent click, or maybe Martyn with a sort of voice command to Alexa, you could actually find yourself with a rather expensive bill. Martyn, what do you think in terms of technology and voice control of things, and Amazon in that particular case? Do you think we need to be much harder in terms of controlling these things?
I do. I think that there need to be a lot more controls in place, but I also think that we need to be a lot more creative about how we implement things like voice and voice interface. 2 out of the largest smart assistants that are out there were really set up as data accumulation exercises. They're there to collect data about consumers in order to profile them. They are, by definition, not designed for kids, and yet you have kids using them in the home, right? So, we have to be a lot stricter about how we allow kids to access those kind of services. And on the flip side of that, we have to get a lot more creative about how we build experiences that are for kids, right, and are built from the ground up for kids, from every perspective, from the point of view of how the data is handled, from the form factor, so it's not just a bit of plastic sitting on a desk, but also the actual interaction that they get in terms of voice, that it's a lot more designed for their needs. So, there's a big gap, I think, in terms of designing for kids with those new types of experiences and technologies that still needs to be addressed.
That's an interesting point. And Madiana, on the content side, are content producers, broadcasters that you deal with, are they thinking about making better use of those interactive tools, sort of more than just, asking it for homework questions, how far is it to the moon or something, on which you can ask an Alexa if you wish? Are you seeing examples where people are using it creatively to tell interactive stories? And there must be benefits and accessibility for children who have, difficulty sort of physically handling things to use voice control. Is that something you're seeing growing?
Absolutely. It's definitely one of the trends that we see within the children's departments of our members, audio storytelling and especially interactivity, also with audio storytelling. There are a few beautiful projects out there. Some of them are indeed educational, but then some others, there's something that I particularly liked. In several Eastern countries, they recorded voices of grandfathers and fathers reading stories of their countries, traditional stories of their countries, and then the kids actually will be able to interact somehow with the voices and with the stories, just as an example of a beautiful project. Definitely something that many of our members are exploring. So we will see a few more projects coming to light in the next couple of months, I would say.
Interesting. It's funny because that reminds me of something many years ago. I was at the SIGGRAPH show, and they had an example of a toy for children, which was a teddy bear, probably like the old Teddy Ruxpin or something, that had, moving arms, and it was able to be animated, and it had a speaker built into it. And this was probably 2006 or something like that when I looked at this, maybe even earlier. 2001, I think it might have been. And the idea there was that a parent could be distant from the child and then could ring up and read a story to the child, and the teddy bear would interact with them at home as if they were there, if you like. Pretty frightening experience, and one for Martyn to be very concerned about with the voice control and kids' toys, which I know you've looked at. Is that something, Martyn, that you've seen develop in terms of voice control?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot more of that now, Simon. I think, the trend, particularly in that smart toy market, is for a lot of that interaction to go offline now. So, we have these kind of neural net type chips and processors that we can embed into toys that never need to connect to the cloud, never need to go off online. So are, number one, a lot more secure from a hardware perspective, but also a lot safer from a data privacy point of view. So, we've seen advances in terms of the actual hardware itself that is moving that market along now.
Okay. Well, before we go back to Carl for the next tranche of information, maybe you touched on neural nets there for a minute, and I was concerned that AI might have a role to play in this future if we're not careful. Is that something, Chris, from a technology perspective, that you see any uses or dangers for children, if you like, in terms of using AI technology?
I think it's getting better, right? A lot of the major providers and the cloud providers, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, their AI is getting very, very clever at things like, face recognition and detection of famous people, celebrities, personalities. But I think, the notion of whether or not something is safe for children is in the context as well. And I think that's where AI really struggles, is sort of contextual analysis of content and what's there. So I think, detecting nudity, profanity, generally fairly good today, right? We've got a good level of accuracy, but I think in terms of looking at a whole 30-minute, piece of long-form content or something that is specifically user-generated, where the audio is maybe not so clear, or the images or the faces are not so clear, or someone's wearing a mask, how do you sort of get past that barrier? So it's certainly not foolproof, but it can help.
Yeah, indeed. We could get into a long discussion about generative adversarial networks or something along those lines, but let's not go there for this conversation. We'll go back to Carl now, and we'll hear some more data and statistics. Over to you, Carl.
Great. Thank you very much, Simon. So yeah, just after the halfway point, I'd like to now switch the focus across really to, I suppose, new media, but I'm picking up on some of the topics we've been discussing, I suppose, the last few minutes on voice and kids' interactivity to date with voice. But I suppose just picking up quickly on some of the themes which came out in the first amount of discussion there as well, with regards to the PIN number and accessing of maybe parents or guardians or maybe older siblings' accounts as well. Is that when we look at the uptake of social media, this here on the left hand side, this bar just shows the number of kids specifically in the UK which have access to the various social media and online video platforms. It does look, it's around about a third across each of them. As you can very much appreciate that when you start to look at the 13 and above category, then these numbers jump significantly. But what's hidden behind these numbers as well is that, young kids, those young as 3, 4, 5, 6, are consuming content, predominantly video content through these platforms as well. And as we've already talked about in this side as well, the governance and regulation in terms of the content on these isn't always that's heavy. And then when we look at the top right hand side there, the pie chart, when we get to the 13 to 16 year olds within the UK, then 2/3 of these kids are now accessing content or social media content every day. It becomes an ever more important factor in the life. And then I think with what we found with was particularly with TikTok and Snapchat, but increasingly now with YouTube as well, and linked back to the UGC, is it's now being much more than a passive consumption media platform as well. The kids we were interviewing for this study, of the ages 13 to 16-year-old group, over 40% of these kids are uploading content as well as consuming content on these platforms as well. So which then puts a whole new level of governance concerns and worries for both parents and the industry in terms of ensuring that what they put up is acceptable and remains in the right place as well. So it does throw up certainly another curveball. So then coming back to the big picture on voice, this isn't from our Kids Tech research, this is more from our industry research tracking of the consumer electronics industry. And when we talk about voice, we're now no longer just talking about wireless speakers, the likes of Amazon and Google speakers. We're talking now of voice proliferating into pretty much most, if not all, consumer electronics platforms and devices. So when we're reaching 2024, we're looking at over 7 billion installed base globally of voice-enabled devices. Effectively, voice being everywhere. We're and then, but when we're looking, at how those devices then split, then obviously smartphones is take up over 50% of that share. We're looking at a real wide variety of devices, likes of you would anticipate tablets, follow smartphones, and wireless speakers, but wearables. We're seeing more and more dedicated kids wearables coming into the marketplace. Also dedicated vision devices like smart TV, set-top box, and media stream are also integrating voice. So, we think about the applications which are enabled, the privacy concerns which are worried. It does put this into a much bigger context than just the current real commands of voice. So when we now look at the usage of voice and the applications which we're seeing being undertaken back to the kids ages 3 through 16, then it is a variety of different types of functionality commanding. Music there, over 3/4 of kids utilizing those wireless speakers effectively for what they're designed for at the core, which is listening to music. And then you have this wide, extended reach of other functions, ranging from games, jokes, audiobooks, and fact finding as well. What we do find from our industry research and the feedback we're having is that the current generation of wireless speaker in its current guise is very much a passive device in request, and then you get your answer as well. When we start to see screens being integrated with voice, Alexa, show me this, Alexa, show me options, and then to move on from there as well. It opens up the opportunities far greater than the current voice-only commands as well. When we start to see either integrated screens within those speakers, or that speaker working more seamlessly with a smart TV, for example, the applications and opportunities for the industry, coming back to some of the early points of what broadcasters are doing already, starts to become much more prominent. And on that topic, to date, from a kid's perspective with wireless speakers, well, I think many of you will be aware of Mattel and its Aristotle wireless speaker products being pulled within around about 6 months of being on the market. Certainly huge data privacy concerns. But as a result of that, some of the steps to dedicated, not necessarily voice platforms, but voice products for kids have been baby steps. Amazon continues to push its kids versions of its dot products. Bottom left there as well, you have a product from Etsy, which just really tarts up a standard Google Mini and puts some Mickey Mouse ears on it, really no more than that, but certainly makes it much more kid-friendly. But then you've also got brands like Only who come to market there on the right with huge, big, strong kids licenses like Disney, like the Gruffalo, and pushing out strong, quite simple but strong propositions with voice activation. And then finally, what we see, I suppose, as a next step of voice is the utilization within a multimedia environment. This is just a quick screen grab I took from a document from Disney's research program. Because at the moment, when you consider linear TV, and as I say, linear TV, still very strong, but certainly for broadcasters, they need to retain that strength moving forward and considering innovation. One of those areas is interaction, and also what can be done with voice. So if you consider the traditional linear path of broadcast content at the moment, Big Bird from Sesame Street asks the colour of an apple. Whether the kid's right or wrong, Big Bird will still give the same answer. But imagine there if there is that degree of that smart TV or that smart speaker listening, and the reaction of that kid is able to then kick off a different response from the character on screen. It creates a much more rich experience for that kid, and also as well presents much more opportunity as well from an educational perspective to deliver that service to children. But I think finally, just to sum up with all of this as well, is we've talked about voice, we've talked about additional screens as well. Is there's still a huge concern, worry generally with parents, with the industry, that digital behaviour, digital consumption is a worry on the welfare and general well-being of kids. There's a huge push. We see there Scroll Free September, which was a originally 2018 initiative from Health UK of kids, but also parents as well, to put down their phones, put down social media, and become more active. But in addition to that as well, you've got the corporate responsibility of companies like Apple and Facebook taking this more seriously now in order to reduce the overall screen time, improve the quality of screen time when they're on that screen, but actually look to make people more socially and as well corporately aware of what they're doing with that platform as well. So I would imagine really when you consider Apple and Facebook, this was almost counterintuitive to what they're trying to achieve. Always having devices in the palms of people's hands, they're certainly their platform in front of your face. But I think there is certainly this requirement for the industry, but also parents as well, to take a more active role in ensuring that kids, whether they're online, whether they're watching broadcasts as well, to have a safer environment. But also, remember, there's more besides that dish of behaviour as well. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Simon at this point.
Carl, thank you very much. Fascinating research there. And it's not all bad. I mean, I don't think you can outsource your screen time monitoring to a technology platform totally, but I keep getting reminders about how much collaboration time I had available last week. But, the fact is that I'm in lockdown. What should I be doing exactly? But in terms of what you touched on there, you mentioned TikTok and things. I mean, there's lots and lots of dance challenges and things, and you can look upon it as being all bad. I'll come to Madiana again in a minute on this, but people are having fun, they're putting out their amusing clips and things, and people are getting a lot of pleasure from it. The amount of content that just gets shared globally when it's viral, when it's something amusing and funny. Do you find, I mean, obviously, we can get all high and mighty about this. I know that Donald Trump doesn't like TikTok very much, but, the rest of the world seems to be enjoying themselves with it. Is it all bad? Is it all a conspiracy to sort of get into our systems and sort of open a back door into our TV set and start talking to our baby monitors and things of that nature? Are there good things coming from this, Carl? Have you any thoughts on that? And then I'll come to Madiana.
I think there's certainly good things that come out of it as well. And then coming back to your point there, Simon, about the latest dance crazes, but even taking a step back from from TikTok, looking at YouTube, just look at Joe Wick's PE. It's got everyone active within this period of lockdown when morale's low, exercise has been limited as well. These new channels have provided the ability to get kids, general people, not necessarily just kids, more active and more engaged and learn new things. So I certainly don't think it is all bad. There is always the conspiracy theory side, and with the concerns over big data capture, consumer profiling. That's never going to go away, is it? But I think there is a lot to be said about the positive sides of these platforms.
Yeah, exactly. And what he did on YouTube there in terms of every morning doing exercise classes, that's now reflected and become a big story on television as well. It gets amplified in the culture. Madiana, what's your experience been with this? I mean, is Twitch the latest bad guy according to EBU broadcasters, or do you see what they're doing as an interesting trend that can be built upon?
Well, I will agree with Carl. Obviously, there are always good things. And something very important is that for whatever reason, kids go there. Now, it might be Twitch, it might be TikTok. And it's extremely important that we get great content with great values to wherever kids are, whether that is to distribute the full content or at least to make sure that they see a bit of it and then they come to wherever we post it. So there are obviously good initiatives and good content for kids, value-driven, informational, educational, fun in all of the platforms. What I think is extremely important is that parents and schools, because kids are perhaps too young, those who are a bit less young should also be part of this. Everybody should be aware of the risks of putting your content out there, what that means, where it might go, that it might stay forever, what you're agreeing to. And at the moment, I don't think that there is enough awareness or enough consciousness about what happens with our private data and our personal content in different platforms. So that's where I would rather go.
Yes, I think you make a very good point there. It's often, if you read the small print of the terms and conditions, these things are often out of your control. Once you've released it to the world, it's there, it's gone forever. I'd like to encourage the audience at this point to engage with us here and send us a few questions. You can type your questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll have a look at them and we'll get back to you. So if you want to hear your question asked to the panel, please do put it in there and we'll come back to you. So please encourage you to do that. In the meantime, maybe back to Chris then. In terms of systems of UGC, you talked about UGC earlier. In fact, in a former life, you and I were involved in London, ITV London and ITV News Local and things, and we had tons of user-generated content coming in every day. And one of the problems is moderation of that. Chris, what technologies have been developed in the 10 years or so since that have made things better or easier for broadcasters to manage or content producers to manage?
Yeah, good question. Actually, not a lot, which is quite sad, right? I think to Madiana's point, this is very much a shared responsibility ecosystem. And the folks that are producing the user-generated content, need to find ways. And I think the platform providers need to get on board with helping people to describe the content that they're producing. This kind of problem can only be resolved and enforced if we have the appropriate data there, to allow that to happen. It's really unrealistic to put together a team of people that can sit and vet every piece of content that is uploaded. I think the problem with the UGC world today for me is that if I'm being blunt about it, people don't really care. It's about likes, it's about retweets, it's about number of views, and that's the only thing that they really worry about. We're never going to be in a position where a platform provider will force people that produce UGC content to add descriptive metadata, tag it, age appropriately. And I think until that really happens, and maybe this is around a cultural shift in terms of where that responsibility lies. Should it really lie with the service provider, or should it rely on those, creating the content in the same way that we hold, the movie studios accountable to make sure that the content is watched by the appropriate audience? I think until that is put in place and it's enforced suitably, it's a very difficult battle to solve. We can do all the engineering in the world, but without enforcement and guidance, it's not really going to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you could never get production crews to put the metadata in, so you're not going to get the public to do it necessarily, are you? Yeah. Martyn, in terms of user-generated content and things of that nature, have you any perspective on that?
Hi, I think just to go back to the earlier comment about awareness raising. I mean, I think that we're in a world where the platforms and the technology moves much more quickly than the regulatory environment and/or our efforts to educate and raise awareness, right? So we have to be so quick to respond to these emerging platforms and educate particularly younger kids about the dangers of using them. But I do think that ultimately, that comes back to the point around it being a very codependent ecosystem and the industry taking responsibility when they're delivering, for example, these platforms to make sure that the appropriate safeguards are in place. I mean, there are things like the Information Commissioner's Office's age-appropriate design code now, which are really good frameworks to use to think about, well, what is age-appropriate for different children and different kids of different ages. But that does put a lot of emphasis and onus on the industry itself to be much more proactive and take a much more ethical stance around these issues.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think if you look back to the research I did, 15 years ago, small research that it was, the number of children that owned mobile phones then has changed massively now. And we learned earlier, I think from Carl or someone, or Chris, that parents are, giving their phones to their kids, and not necessarily with a SIM card in, but to use them as devices, if you like. That's a bit of a worry in a way, because some of the older devices are the ones that have the weakest security or the weakest protection against these things. They don't always keep up to date with the latest technology, which is a very important area. So I don't know whether that's a concern or not, but I think, I'd like to emphasize the positives a little bit, because Madiana, you found with your members this year that this year's been a real boon in terms of reaching out to audiences, surely, for EBU members. What positives have come out of this year of sort of being locked down and spending more time at home, would you say?
So I actually see quite a lot of positives and benefits. One of them, we have data that show that children and young adults have consumed more media and more public service media content during the lockdown, which means not only random content, but also more of information, which is a very good thing. But then the specific point I wanted to raise is also education, obviously. During the lockdown, with schools being closed in most European countries, it was basically public broadcasters who were still delivering with different new platforms that they launched, or also on linear channels, the official education and curriculum education for kids not to stop their education despite the lockdown. An important point that I wanted to mention as part of this was the fact that, and we've been discussing this previously to this session, not all kids have the same easy access to technology in all areas of all countries in Europe. So public broadcasters, I think, made a good decision there to also bring some of the educational content on linear, not only television, but also radio, quite a lot of educational content on radio. I'm seeing also quite a lot of interactivity through radio programs, because some of these kids are not allowed to be on social media. So during the COVID, some of the public broadcasters launched information programs so that kids could understand what happened around them, the COVID situation, what that meant for them, why they were seeing their parents sort of worried, and how to protect themselves from the virus. Radio programs allowed kids to ask questions directly to different experts or to different hosts, which was a very good thing. And then another point beyond education and information is that public broadcasters entertained, obviously, kids, but then also helped them to be connected with other kids, which was a very important element for kids that were completely isolated in their homes. And it's extremely important that we give them some sort of social interaction with their classmates and other kids. So that was actually one of the positive things that we managed to do thanks to technology during the lockdown.
Okay, thank you very much. We have actually got a question here from Nick Radlow from the Royal Television Society. Nick's question, I'm not sure it's a question or more of a statement, but ethical response, he says, by the supplier, ? Is that likely to be implemented voluntarily? So he's saying, I think, do we need regulation to make sure that ethical responses are built into products? We'll start with you, Madiana, as you're on screen.
It's a personal view here, obviously, but I actually tend to agree, because actually I believe that unless we sort of push for this to happen and make sure that regulations are also there, then not all providers will respect the ethical responsibilities of creating a really safe environment for kids. I said earlier that I'm in favor for awareness as much as possible, but I do think that regulation somehow sort of helps to enforce at least a framework of regulation, of minimum standards about privacy, about what's not allowed, and then also how to foster digital skills for kids would definitely help.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. And then maybe Martyn on this one. In terms of implementing this voluntarily, do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that regulation plays a role in getting an ethical response?
I think both play a role, but I don't necessarily see why suppliers or commercial interests taking an ethical stance is necessarily in a contradiction to their commercial objectives, right? It can also be a good thing. I mean, I'm a parent. I have 3 young kids. I'm much more likely for my kids and for allow my kids to use a service if I know that service is taking an ethical approach to my kids' safety and privacy, right? So, and I think that as parents become more literate and more educated about data privacy issues around their kids and the services that they're using, there's a huge opportunity there for businesses, content providers, service providers to take an ethical approach and to be transparent about that, to be open about it, right? So, I don't see them as being, I think there's an intimation in the question that they are mutually exclusive. I don't think they are.
Okay, that's interesting. There's another question coming from Richard Lindsay Davis, the CEO of the DTG, and that is, it reminds me of there's a pressure group within the UK called Turn On the Subtitles, and their research demonstrates that by turning on the subtitle on children's programming, whether it's in your native language or in some countries in other languages as well, you can improve literacy for children. Now, do you think, maybe I'll put this to all of you, should Ofcom up the requirements for inclusion for wider learning and inclusion features in their December public service broadcaster consultation? Who would like to take that? Hands up. No? Anyone heard about it? Anyone heard about this particular aspect? This is where when you turn on a television set, the default position for children's programming should be that subtitles are on. Madiana, do you think that would work with your broadcasters or not?
I'm sorry, Simon, because I lost you for a few seconds while you asked, while you gave the context. So I'm not sure if I then heard you asked if we had heard about it, but I didn't hear what you were mentioning.
Okay. There's been a campaign in the UK called Turn On the Subtitles, which was designed to try and force devices to come on with subtitles on for children's programming. The idea being that helps with literacy and inclusion and demonstrates the educational benefits of it, if you like. You can always turn them off, but the idea would be the default position should be on. And in Ofcom, the regulator in the UK, is planning some requirements for public service broadcasters as consultations towards the end of the year. Do you think maybe something like that would be an interesting learning and beneficial for children?
Yes, I would actually say yes, because actually it's an area which I know is an extremely important area for public broadcasters. It's linked to accessibility. So clearly making all content available to all kids, especially also those who might have disabilities, is a very important aspect, and it's part of the remit of public broadcasters, clearly. So absolutely yes.
Okay, good. Any other comments from the panel on that one? I have another question if not. Okay, no hands up.
I'll jump in there.
Simon Gauntlet from Dolby.
I can only give a very personal experience.
Martyn, go ahead.
Sorry, Simon. I was just going to give a very personal experience. My kids turn on subtitles for everything. So I'm very, very happy to see that being promoted. I think it's a great idea, and they use it extensively themselves. So yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay, there's an interesting one from Simon Gauntlet, who's from the Dolby Laboratories. He said on the positive side, 8-year-olds, I'm not sure whether that's his own experience at home or not, but can capture, edit and publish video content. Surely this is a boost for the future of our creative industries. Let's go to Chris on that one. See what you think, Chris.
Yeah, I agree, right? I think it's fantastic. And we sit here maybe cautious of user-generated content and what it brings around the uncertainty. But I think to Simon's point, the creativity and what people can produce is phenomenal, right? I've recently taken delivery of an iPhone 12 with Dolby Vision and sort of playing around with some of the capabilities there. And what you can produce now from a handset is pretty staggering. It's really cool. So I think, yes, I agree with Simon. The challenge is then just how do we couple this, right? And to the point around the sort of privacy and safety of a young audience, I think youngsters producing content for youngsters is less of a concern than an older generation producing content that, we may deem or may not deem, sort of child-friendly, if you like. So, yes, I agree with Simon. I still think we have a long way to go, though, to solve the challenge of how we protect audiences with that.
Carl, in your research, did you come across any examples of user-generated content or content production from younger people as a result of technology being a boon, if you like?
It's one of the areas, yeah. Yeah, it's actually one of the areas we've drilled down in the last 12 months. Actually, this specific question in terms of the home production side, and link that to our industry research. We've seen a huge boom in the pro audio equipment for home usage, whether that be microphones or headsets. So yeah, and I completely agree with Simon that this is a fantastic opportunity to develop, from a really young age, the creative sparks in children. But coming back to Chris's point, it's just then how that content is then managed online for distribution. But we've seen numbers rocket in terms of kids wanting their own channels. And I always quote the idea of, almost like the heroes of today are no longer the likes of Messi or Ronaldo. It's Dan TDM, it's Ninja, these, YouTube vloggers are gaining more interest and more audience.
That's interesting. I'm reminded Madiana and I were on a panel in Belgium many years ago at Google's HQ there to talk about, if you like, the YouTube stars becoming global megastars. I'm sure they're not having multi-thousands of people meeting in different cities now to sort of celebrate their activities. But Madiana, do you think your next Steven Spielberg might be in the sort of 8-year-old camp?
I would say, why not? I actually see a lot of benefits indeed of kids and teenagers being able to be creative with content and with platforms. Obviously, we know the limitations and the risks that we were talking about, but I think it's a brilliant thing if they're coached and accompanied well on, both the dangers and also the possibilities. We know that with kids is something that it works really, really well to ask them to produce content as part of a format and make sure that they feel that they are part of it. But then for teenagers and young adults, it's even crucial, I would say. You have to let young people produce content for young people. Otherwise, you're very likely going to be obsolete. So I would not be surprised if the next film by Spielberg was actually made by the youngsters and well coached by the experienced media professionals.
Okay, very good. I think that's a marvellous statement. It's quite interesting. I did spot something, I've just remembered it now actually, about a few weeks back. There was a sort of evening tea time programme on, I think it was Sky, doing Sky programming in the UK. I'm not sure what channel it was on now, but they had children presenting and basically presenting their favourite thing that week. And, each panellist was a young presenter and very good at it they were, So I think that's an encouraging step forward. Is that something you're seeing in other broadcasts? Are they giving children the chance to go out and produce and use this great technology for fun, if you like? Good. Good. We have... Oh, sorry? No,
sorry,
no further question there.
Yeah,
I was, but it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, yes, actually, and I can mention. Well, many of the broadcasters are actually investing in formats which involve kids being part of the content. Lots of them. It's actually a common practice now. But actually, 2 weeks ago, we had even an international thing facilitated by us in the EBU. It's actually a campaign for kids to allow them to promote friendship and inclusion in children's environment. And basically, we gave them a song and we gave them a choreography. And it was up to them to play the song and play the choreography in different places of their environments, and then send their content to the public broadcasters, which then, with a lot of obviously awareness about what the privacy was about, what the content was going to be used, how, and so on, then the content that the broadcasters produced about this was actually made by the kids. Very good. Excellent. And I did have a comment from Nick Radlow again further to say that he turns the subtitles on everything, but I'm not sure whether that's his hearing nowadays. You never know. Sorry, Nick. So I think maybe in the light of no further questions from the audience at this stage, but I'll keep my eye on it, I thought we might move on to sort of wrap up and maybe come on to... We talked about some of the positives, and I think, technology as well being a key benefit today in terms of reaching audiences. I think if there's one thing you take from this discussion today, and we'll go with
Martyn first and then ask all of you to comment. Do you see it as a positive generally that children are getting involved in technology in this way, or do you think that on balance we should be more concerned about access and control and regulation? You know, on which side of the seesaw are you on that particular point? I'll start with Martyn.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Well, 100%. I'm definitely think we should be very careful about how we regulate and control experiences for kids. But I don't think that should be allowed to get in the way of the opportunity that's out there for us to be a lot more creative about how we redesign these experiences going forwards. I mean, I thought it was really interesting. The car was presenting, particularly, and I would say this, of course, about the ubiquity of voice across devices in the home. Right, that presents a huge opportunity to create content that is much more interactive and engaging for kids, that they can actually take part in branching dialogues and scenarios by speaking back to characters on a screen, by dictating the storylines themselves as they respond. You know, so there's a huge amount of opportunities out there. We just have to be, as an industry, you know, a lot more careful about how we implement the technology that supports that, and not necessarily take as our cue the kind of technologies that we see that are out to really, you know, very much micro-profile consumers and sell them more stuff, right? So it's about just taking a much more responsible view, looking at things like privacy by design as an approach, and designing experiences for kids that they're going to enjoy so much more.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Martyn. Chris, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think, following on from Martyn, right, I think the ethical intent is really there, right? I think where we're sitting netting out from a tech perspective is it is still quite difficult to achieve. But, you know, what is technology enabling? Well, sort of learning, right, and enablement. As an adult, I still get huge amount of joy from YouTube, watching people dismantle things and things I never thought I'd be able to learn how to do. You know, I do, and I think for a young person, the environment that we're in, you know, really, you know, fosters that ability to learn, and it's incredible. You know, technology enables young people to make movies, code applications, write games. You know, things that we didn't have the ability to do sort of 15 years ago. I think to take a look, if I'm honest, at some of the policies and the things coming out of the EU, like GDPR. I know some of this stuff is in there with the best intention, but actually some of these things to restrict the information we know about people are making it harder and harder to protect young audiences. So I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years, especially as more young people get involved with using this technology.
Yes, I think you're right. Absolutely. Carl, your perspective on that point.
Yeah, and I suppose, first of all, adding my perspective as a parent, actually, I just think, you know, echoing both Martyn and Chris's points there is, you know, what kids have access to today is fantastic, isn't it? You know, able to discover, explore, fact find, you know, understand how to build, create. You know, it's all there on a plate through a multitude of different devices and screens. But the flip side to it, that as a parent, you know, the fact that you've got kids on different screens, different platforms, different services, does then fill you with a degree of worry, you know, because as you say, there is a certain amount of regulation in place, certain amount of governance, about protection coming from these service providers, but it's not perfect, is it? You know, but I think, you know, we are going to get there. You know, when we see lots of innovation in terms of voice, whether that be, you know, recognition or the ability of that provider to recognize a kid's voice specifically and dumb down the proposition and service accordingly. There's innovation on camera tech as well to actually recognise the build of an individual's profile from that perspective. So I think really echoing some of the points already, you know, 2 to 3 years, wow, you know, what we'll be living in and how much further can we push this? But yeah, I would definitely say on the seesaw side of positivity, but there is obviously those concerns as well.
Okay. Well, look, I've got a couple more questions coming, but as Madiana's probably prepared her answer, I'll let her go first, and then we'll come back to the questions.
Well, I was anyway going to echo everything again. Clearly, lots of risks, both from a safety internet perspective and also from a development, kids' social development. But then lots of opportunities and possibilities that, if used right, clearly are only positive. Yeah. But so yeah, more of the same. So go ahead with your question, Simon.
That sounds more positive to me. That's good. Well, I have one from Melissa Hawker here, and this is. Who do you think should be responsible for educating children to be more media savvy as technology becomes more capable of profiling children and extracting personal information? Should it be the government? Should it be education? Should it be media? Or should it be the parents? We'll start with you, Madiana.
I think I'll just go for what we were saying since the beginning. It's a shared responsibility in all cases, and it's not easy to say this because then if it's a responsibility of everyone, then you take the risk that nobody takes the responsibility. But I actually believe that, I still believe in goodwill, and that the fact that we all want the best for our kids anyway. So there is a shared responsibility with policymakers and regulators, clearly with the platform providers in setting up certain filters and certain guidance, being very transparent on how they use their content and where that content goes, and definitely schools, associations and parents in educating their kids, and then also in being there. It's not just a question of telling your kids, don't do this way. It's actually, there are several initiatives that parents can take, making sure that kids respect certain schedules, making sure that the laptop or the platform is in a place which is easily seeable by the rest of the family, that kids know about all of this. There have been actually a few initiatives by public broadcasters. The BBC Own It Up in the UK that some of you might know is particularly for kids to learn themselves also about all the topics that we've been mentioning during the panel. So I would say, again, shared responsibility.
Okay, that's good. I know, Chris, you were talking shared responsibility earlier. Do you think we can totally rely on that, or is there a hint of regulation needed as well?
I think regulation is needed. I think from a learning perspective, it's certainly shared responsibility, right? As a parent, I'm not a parent, right? But I think as a parent, if you're going to give a child a phone, or a device or a tablet, you have to expect that you're opening some element of Pandora's box, right? The ability for that child to go and explore is going to be pretty vast. I'm not saying the parent has the eventual responsibility, but I think you need to be sort of mindful of that.
I'm reminded of something, Chris, that I did with my son. I've got a box in the garage full of old mobile phones, that passed through the generations. And I remember once he took a brand new Nokia phone, which was current at the time, and somebody reversed their car over the phone and crushed it when it dropped out of his pocket. So my answer was to give him a Nokia slide phone with the green display, the very first SMS phone, if you like. I think it was in one of the first Matrix movies. So he had to turn up at school with this green display and a slide phone. He was really mortified. But that's the answer, give him old technology. We have another question from an anonymous questioner. This is, what role is there for more sophisticated parental controls set at a household level? Surely age appropriateness becomes more subjective, particularly as kids get older. Should we be relying solely on the provider? And that's a good point. Go on, Chris.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? So I mentioned around these 44 different content rating systems globally, right? We're in an age where if somebody goes to Amazon, they purchase a product, that product may be a router or a home gateway, or something that's not particularly set up or geared just to work in one specific territory. The problem that we have is with so many rating systems and no universal approach to defining what is, safe for a minor or a young audience, what should be, rated as 16 in one country, maybe 14 in another. It's a very, very difficult thing to just, ship it as part of a product and turn it on. I think we need to get to an international standard schema for this. We need to get rid of 44 variants. And I think globally, once we can agree on different levels of parental control or rating schema, it'll be a much simpler problem to solve.
Yeah. Anyone else come back on that?
Yeah, I might just jump in there as well, Simon, if that's okay. I think there's a couple of problems here. One is, from a regulatory point of view, we rely very heavily on two principles, whether it's with COPPA or with GDPR. One is the area of informed consent, and the other is transparency, right? And I think we generally place we probably overestimate a little bit and place a lot of burden on parents to make that informed consent decision. And I'm in the industry, and even I struggle sometimes to understand the precise terms and conditions of the services that the kids are looking to access and sign up to. So maybe the answer is around transparency, and maybe we need to think of new ways of describing terms and conditions. Like nobody wants to scroll through pages and pages of text. Maybe there should be a video describing this is what's going to happen when you use this service. Here's the data. This is what's going to happen to your data. This is how it's going to be used. These are the third parties it's going to be passed to. No, maybe we just need to think creatively about how we present that information rather than trying to place the entire burden on parents.
Well, I think Channel 4 in the UK did something on that. They did a video once that explained what would happen if you signed up to their online services, because all broadcasters in the last few years have tried to get people to log in because then they know what their audience is doing. And it's important to know that, and you can understand what the audience is doing, but there is a limit in terms of how much information you want to give away. We had a question here, which is, does television have a role in protecting children against online bullying? I'll come to you, Madiana. You mentioned this, I think, in passing earlier. I suppose it's got more of a relationship to social media as well. But do you have a point of view on that particular point?
I personally believe that all of us have a role in fighting bullying and promoting other ways of kids' interactions in their environments. Obviously, television as well. I'd say television because that was what the question was about, but clearly also radios, media in general. The initiative that I mentioned earlier indeed has strong social media components, but actually with the content that kids produced to be themselves active parts in fighting bullying and promoting friendship and inclusion. With that content, many public broadcasters produced a lot of linear content on TV, on radios, documentaries about it, experiences with kids, interviews with kids about it, telling the stories of what bullying actually means for some kids so that other kids could understand and see it from an emotional perspective. Obviously, television and radio and social media and all of us do have a role in fighting bullying.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe Martyn, do you have anything on that? Because again, it touches on an area you're concerned with, I think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the author of the question, and it's Priti Patel, and it's related to bullying. So I'm not sure if there's somebody being a little mischievous.
I didn't mention that. I assumed it might be mischievous.
It does have a role
anyway,
to play.
The question's valid.
But clearly, TV has a role to play in terms of education around that, in terms of understanding the dangers, in terms of the safety aspect. It comes back to a lot of the points that were made early on by Madiana about education. A lot of this is about education and understanding what are the concerns and what are the safety issues out there.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, to be honest, I know video on demand and television comes in for a lot of stick, if you like, but there's a great deal of concern around Internet of Things devices. There was some report this morning to say that, some of these doorbell cams have got some security issues, and that's something the DTG is beginning to look at as well in terms of security around Internet of Things devices. We have another question here from Melissa Hawker again from the Creative Works. If terms and conditions are aimed at children's services, shouldn't they be in a language that children can understand? I think that's a really good point. Maybe Madiana, your feedback on that one. What language should we use when we're talking to children on these platforms?
Well, I think you made a good point, and I think it's just an obvious sort of answer. Of course, everything that we do for kids should be in a language they understand. We're clearly not just talking about language, English, French. We're talking about explaining it in a good way. So for legal reasons, you might need to use specific terms, fine, but then there needs to be complementary content that allows kids to understand what that is about. I absolutely agree. It needs to be explained in their own language.
I have
And
another
I think
thought.
the video idea Martyn had was useful. Chris, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, I have another thought on this, right? It's like giving a kid an ice cream and saying, hey, if you eat this, you're going to get fat. They're not going to care. They're going to do it, right? I think it gets to a point where children don't really, you can explain, but I think there is maybe an age level where, you know, if they're engaged in those kind of kids services, are they really caring too much about the terms and conditions? And hey, we might show you an advert for something that you might want to buy, or, you know, we know roughly what area of the country you live in. I think the appetite for children at that age to get access to what they want to get access to, I don't think the terms and conditions like that is going to be enough of a differentiator, if I'm honest.
Hey, well, adults don't read them. Why should kids? You know,
Well,
that's the point. You never read them, Chris.
Never.
So, anyway, I think that's a really good session. Thank you very much, everybody, for contributing today. And thanks to the audience for the questions. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to thank Madiana, Chris, Martyn, and Carl today for their contributions. I hope you all found it very interesting, and it's just shows you the breadth of topics that we cover within the Digital TV group. So just to remind you all, we have one more FutureTech session tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we'll be exploring intelligent product development, sorry, not production. So register using the banner on your screen if you haven't done it already. And thank you very much, everybody. Thank you and goodbye, and stay safe, and hope you all get out for Christmas and don't infect anybody. Take care. Oh, hang on. There's another question. Oh, great session. That's a comment. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye, everybody.